The stars were quiet, silent as always in the cold dark of space. But deep within the Zalari Concorde's territory, something strange had just happened. A ship had arrived. It came without warning. No fleet behind it, no signal before it. Just one lone vessel, cutting through the black like a blade. It moved fast, faster than anything the Zalari had ever seen. And it was big. Not massive like a dreadnought, but sleek, sharp, and deadly looking. On the bridge of the Zalari command station, orbital eye, alarms began to blare. Lights flashed red. Officers scrambled to their consoles. "Unknown vessel detected," said Lieutenant Varnak, eyes wide. "No identification codes. No known class match." Commander Sorel, a tall Zalari with smooth gray skin and piercing yellow eyes, stood at the center of the room. He looked at the main screen. The image showed the ship clearly now. It was silver, with lines of blue light running along its hull. Strange symbols marked its sides. "Run full scans," he ordered. Varnak obeyed quickly. Sensors stretched out across space trying to learn more about the new arrival, but the readings made no sense. "It's emitting energy signatures we don't recognize," Varnak said. "And its weapons, they're off the scale." Sorel narrowed his eyes. "Weapons? Yes, sir. We picked up a pulse from the front section. It wasn't aimed at us, but if it had been—" "What?" Sorel snapped. "It could have destroyed a cruiser in one shot." Silence fell over the bridge. One ship. One shot. One cruiser gone. "That's not possible," said another officer. "Then, explain this," Varnak said, pulling up data on the screen. "Our best ships would need at least 3 direct hits to take down a cruiser. This thing, it only needed 1. Sorel took a slow breath. "Open a channel. Let's talk to them." Across the void, the human warship floated in silence. Inside the USS Liberty, Captain Daniel Hayes sat in the command chair. His face was calm, his eyes steady. Around him, the crew worked quietly, focused on their tasks. They knew what was happening. They were the first humans to make contact with an alien empire. There were no second chances here. "Captain," said Ensign Ellie Morgan from the comm station. "We're being hailed by the Zalari," Hayes nodded. "Put them on screen." The main view changed. The face of Commander Sorel appeared. His expression was serious. "This is Commander Sorel of the Zalari Concorde," he said. "You are in restricted space. Identify yourself." Hayes stood slowly. He straightened his uniform and stepped forward. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes, of the United States Space Navy," he said. "We come in peace. We mean no harm." There was a pause. "You speak our language?" Sorel asked. "We learned it," Hayes replied. "We've been watching you for some time." That hit hard. "Watching us?" Sorel's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" Hayes gave a small smile. "To talk, to understand each other. That's all." Another pause. Sorel looked around his bridge. His officers were uneasy. Some whispered among themselves. He turned back to the screen. "You entered our space without permission. You have powerful weapons. And now you say you only want to talk?" Hayes didn't flinch. "Yes." Sorel studied him. The human was calm, confident, not afraid. That worried him. "Hold position," he said finally. "Do not move." Hayes nodded. "Understood." The screen went dark. Back on the Liberty, Exo Maggie Carter leaned close to Hayes. "They're scared," she said softly. "I know," Hayes replied. "Good." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You wanted that?" "I wanted them to know we're not weak," he said. "First impressions matter," she sighed. "Just don't scare them too much. We don't want them shooting first." Hayes smiled. "Don't worry, I've got this." Outside, the Zalari fleet gathered. Ships of all kinds flew into formation around the Liberty. Cruisers, destroyers, even a few heavy carriers. Dozens of them. They circled the human ship like wolves around prey. Sorel watched from his command deck. This one ship has every major unit in the sector surrounding it, said Admiral Korak, standing beside him. And still, Sorel said, we don't know what it can do. Korak crossed his arms. We should destroy it. No, Sorel said firmly. Not yet. Korak frowned. Why not? Because we don't know how many others are out there. That thought chilled the air. How many others? If this was just one ship, what else did these humans have? On board the Liberty, sensors tracked the growing fleet. They're boxing us in, said Tactical Officer Jake Ross. Hayes looked at the screen. Let them. Jake blinked. Sir? They're trying to intimidate us, Hayes said. I'm letting them think it's working. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but Maggie stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Trust the captain, she said. Jake shut up. Hayes stood again. Ross, prepare point defense systems, just in case things go south. Aye, sir. Meanwhile, Ellie Morgan monitored the Zalari communications. They're sending messages to their homeworld, she said. Looks like they're calling in help. Hayes frowned. How far away is it? About 2 days at high speed. So we have time. For now. Hayes walked back to his seat. He sat down, thinking. Time was on their side. For now. But he also knew something else. This was the moment history would remember. Humans had made first contact, and they had done it not as victims, not as weaklings, but as equals, maybe even more. Back on Zalari Prime, panic was beginning to spread. In the capital city of Velor, news reports played the same footage over and over, the Liberty floating alone, surrounded by the might of the Zalari Navy. People watched in awe, in fear. Who were these humans? Where had they come from? And why did they look so confident? At the Grand Council Hall, the High Elders met in secret. We must act, said Elder Ralzek. This ship could be a scout. If Earth has a whole fleet, we don't know that, said Elder Ptolemine. We don't know anything except that one ship has shaken our entire military. Ralzek pointed at the screen. Then we destroy it before it becomes a problem. Ptolemine shook her head. No, that would be a mistake. Why? Because if they're stronger than we think, and we attack first, we may start a war we cannot win. Silence filled the chamber. War. The word hung in the air. Nobody wanted that, but nobody wanted to be weak either. On the Liberty, Hayes and Maggie stood together near the observation deck. Stars passed by silently. You really think we can pull this off? Maggie asked. Hayes looked out at the stars. I don't know, but we have to try. She nodded. For Earth. For Earth. Back on the bridge, Ellie called out. Sir, the Zalari are sending a shuttle. Hayes turned. Finally. The shuttle approached slowly. It was small, unarmed. A diplomatic envoy. Hayes turned to Maggie. Get ready. First handshake between humans and aliens. She smiled. Try not to scare them too much. I'll do my best. Minutes later, the shuttle docked. The door opened. Out stepped a tall Zalari figure dressed in formal robes. Behind him, 2 guards followed closely. Hayes and Maggie walked forward. They met in the middle of the room. The Zalari bowed slightly. I am Envoy Threxon, he said. I represent the Zalari Concord. Hayes held out his hand. I'm Captain Daniel Hayes. Welcome aboard the USS Liberty. Threxon stared at the hand. Then slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched it. The first handshake between species, history, had just been made. As they walked toward the conference room, Threxon looked around. This ship, he said. It is unlike anything we have seen. Hayes smiled. Wait until you see the rest. The meeting began. Questions were asked, answers were given. The Zalari wanted to know everything, where Earth was, how they found them, what their technology could do. Hayes gave only what was necessary. We discovered FTL travel 5 years ago, he said. We've been exploring quietly since then. Threxon looked shocked. And you kept it hidden? We didn't want to startle anyone. Threxon gave a dry laugh. Mission failed. Hayes grinned. After hours of talks, the envoy returned to his shuttle. As it left, Maggie walked beside Hayes. "Well?" she asked. "They're curious," Hayes said. "And scared, but not hostile." "Not yet." She looked at him. "You think they'll attack?" "I think they're trying to decide if they can afford not to." Maggie sighed. "Great." Hayes turned to her. "This is just the beginning." And outside, the stars remained silent. But the galaxy had changed forever. The meeting between Captain Daniel Hayes and Envoy Threxon had gone better than expected. The Zalari were cautious but curious. Still, curiosity could be dangerous, especially in a galaxy where power dictated peace. Back on the Liberty, the human crew worked quietly while Threxon was escorted back to his shuttle. Everyone knew. This was just the beginning. Outside the warship, the Zalari fleet still circled like wolves, waiting for orders. Inside their command station, Orbital I, Commander Sorel watched the footage from the handshake aboard the Liberty. He studied every movement, every word. "They're hiding something," he muttered. Beside him, Admiral Korak crossed his arms. "Of course they are. Every species hides what it fears others will steal." Sorel turned to his officers. "Run deeper scans. I want to know everything about that ship." A young officer named Varnak hesitated. "Commander, our sensors barely scratched the surface before." "Then scratch harder," Sorel said coldly. On board the Liberty, Maggie Carter stood near the sensor array with Tactical Officer Jake Ross. "They're scanning us again," she said, frowning at the data stream. "And this time it's more aggressive." Jake looked up. "They're not just looking anymore, they're trying to break through our shielding." Maggie turned to him. "How much can they see?" Jake tapped a few keys. "Not much. Our systems are built to resist probing, but if they keep pushing, they'll trigger an automated defense response," Maggie finished. She hurried to the captain's quarters. Hayes was reviewing mission logs when she entered. "They're pushing too hard," she said without greeting. Hayes looked up. "Define too hard." "They're sending high-frequency pulses into our hull, trying to map internal structures. It's bordering on hostile." Hayes frowned. "That's not diplomacy. That's espionage." He stood and walked to the bridge. "Ellie," he called out. "Open a channel to the Zalari flagship." Ensign Ellie Morgan nodded. A moment later, the face of Commander Sorel appeared on the screen. "We warned you," Hayes said calmly. "We came here to talk, not to be poked and scanned like lab rats." Sorel didn't flinch. "You arrived with unknown weapons. We have the right to understand the threat we face." "You don't understand," Hayes replied. "You're not facing a threat. You're facing a choice." Sorel raised an eyebrow. "And what choice is that?" "To respect boundaries, or find out what happens when you cross them." Before Sorel could respond, alarms blared across the Liberty's bridge. "Sir," Jake shouted, "they've triggered our countermeasures." Hayes turned sharply. "What kind?" Jake's fingers flew over the console. Defensive pulse launched. It knocked out 3 scout ships and 1 frigate. Silence fell over the room. Outside, the Zalari formation broke apart as ships lost control. Lights flickered. Systems failed. 1 frigate drifted lifelessly into space. Back on the Orbital I, chaos erupted. "What happened?" Sorel roared. Varnak stared at his screen, pale. "Their ship. It responded automatically, like it has a mind of its own." Korak stepped forward. "You mean it attacked us?" "No," Varnak whispered. "It defended itself." Sorel's eyes darkened. "This is an act of aggression." "No, it isn't," Hayes said over the comms. "You pushed too far. My systems reacted to protect themselves, just like yours would." Sorel's jaw tightened. "You sent a pulse that disabled 3 ships and crippled a 4th. That's not defense. That's destruction." Hayes took a breath. "You wanted to know how strong we are, now you do." Sorel's voice dropped low. "Don't test us, human." Hayes leaned forward. "Same goes for you." The channel cut. Panic spread quickly through the Zalari ranks. Word of the incident reached Zalari Prime within minutes. Across the capital city of Velar, news reports showed footage of the damaged ships. Citizens gathered in public squares, whispering rumors. Who were these humans? How did their ship react so fast? And why hadn't it fired a single weapon? In the Grand Council Hall, the High Elders met once more. This proves it, said Elder Ralzek. They're a danger to the conquered. Elder Talamine shook her head. No. This proves they have superior technology and restraint. Ralzek slammed his fist on the table. Restraint? Their machine nearly destroyed a frigate. Talamine held his gaze. But it didn't destroy it. It only shut it down. That's mercy, not malice. Ralzek scoffed. Mercy from a race we know nothing about? That's foolishness. Talamine stood slowly. Then tell me, Ralzek, what would you have done in their place if someone broke into your home and started poking around? Ralzek opened his mouth, then closed it. Talamine continued. They warned us. We ignored them. Now we pay. The price, another elder spoke. What should we do now? Talamine looked toward the stars outside the window. We learn, she said simply. Before we decide who they really are. Back on board the Liberty, the mood was tense. We made first contact, Maggie said, pacing the bridge. And already we've taken out part of their fleet. Jake sighed. Technically, the ship did it by itself. That doesn't matter, Maggie snapped. To them, we did it. Hayes walked in, calm as ever. Then we make sure they know it wasn't intentional. Maggie turned to him. You think they'll believe that? I think they'll listen, Hayes said. If we give them reason to. Just then, Ellie called out. Incoming transmission, priority level high. Hayes nodded. Put it on screen. The image of Envoy Threxon appeared. His expression was serious. Captain Hayes, he said. You must come to the orbital eye. Immediately. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Is that an invitation or a demand? Threxon's tone was firm. It's a request from the High Council. Hayes glanced at Maggie. She shrugged. Guess we're going. An hour later, the Liberty docked at the massive Zalari station. Hayes, Maggie, and a small security team stepped off the ship. Waiting for them was Threxon, along with a group of heavily armed guards. Hayes noticed the tension immediately. Relax, he said, raising his hands slightly. We're here to talk. Threxon nodded. Come with me. They were led through long corridors, past rows of Zalari soldiers. All eyes followed them. Inside a grand chamber, the High Council waited. Hayes and Maggie stood before them. Talamine stepped forward. Captain Hayes, she said. We need to understand your people. Hayes met her gaze. Ask. How did your ship disable our vessels without firing a shot? Hayes smiled. Because we don't fight like you do. Talamine tilted her head. Explain. Our tech is designed to defend, not destroy. When your probes got too close, our system reacted automatically. It shut them down, but didn't hurt anyone. Ralzek scoffed. So you say. Hayes turned to him. Would you prefer we'd blown them out of the sky? Silence. Talamine spoke again. Your ship is unlike anything we've seen. How did you build it? Hayes paused. We learned. Fast. Maggie added. Our AI helps us process information faster than any organic brain can. We use it to manage everything, from navigation to combat. The council murmured among themselves. AI-controlled warfare? Such power in one vessel, it was terrifying and fascinating. Finally, Talamine said, You claim to come in peace, but your actions speak louder than words. Hayes nodded. I know. That's why we're here, to clear the air. Threxon stepped in. Then answer me this, Captain. If your people are peaceful, why send a warship? Hayes looked him straight in the eye. Because peace means nothing without strength. The room fell silent. Even Ralzek had no reply. Later that night, Hayes and Maggie returned to the Liberty. As they walked through the halls, Maggie finally exhaled. "That went better than I expected," she said. Hayes nodded. "They're scared. But they're listening." Maggie looked at him. "Do you think they'll try to copy our tech?" "I'm sure they'll try," Hayes said, "but they won't succeed, not yet." She smiled faintly. "Good." Back on the bridge, Jake sat at his post. "Sir," he said, "we picked up a signal from another system. Looks like other races are watching us now." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Other empires?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. And they're not all friendly." Hayes looked out the view screen. Beyond the stars, the galaxy was watching. Waiting. Wondering. Who were these humans, and what else were they hiding? Hayes turned to his crew. "Well," he said, "looks like the party's just getting started." The Liberty remained docked at the Zalari station for another full day. During that time, teams of Zalari engineers and scientists were allowed limited access to the human warship. They moved carefully through its halls, scanning everything they could. Their eyes widened at the sight of glowing panels, smooth metal walls, and strange lights that responded to movement. But the most shocking part was the ship's AI, known only as Haven. At first, the Zalari tried to interface their own systems with it. They sent data packets, attempted remote access, even tried to map Haven's core functions. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. Inside the Liberty's command center, Maggie Carter watched as a Zalari tech connected a small device to one of the ship's terminals. "Captain," she said, turning to Hayes, who stood nearby. "They're trying to link their system with Haven." Hayes didn't look worried. "Let them try." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" He smiled slightly. "It'll be educational." Back in the engineering bay, the Zalari technician pressed a final button. A moment later, every screen on the orbital eye flickered, then went dark. Alarms blared across the station. "What's happening?" Commander Sorrell shouted from the bridge. Varnak stared at his console, wide-eyed. "Something inside the human ship just reached into our network and rewrote parts of it." Korak stepped forward. "Explain." "It wasn't a virus," Varnak said slowly. "It was more like a conversation. Our systems tried to talk to theirs, and then what?" Sorrell demanded. "They got overwhelmed. Silence fell over the room. Overwhelmed by a single warship. Back on board the Liberty." Maggie turned to Jake Ross. "You think Haven did that on purpose?" Jake shook his head. "No, it probably just answered their questions too fast. Like talking to a child and suddenly giving them a college textbook." Maggie sighed. "Great, we broke their computers." Hayes chuckled. "Not broken, just upgraded." Jake gave him a look. "That's not how diplomacy works." Hayes leaned back in his chair. Sometimes showing strength is the best way to earn respect. Outside the station, news of the incident spread quickly. Across Zalari space, rumors began flying. A single human ship had shut down a major military station. Its AI could think faster than any organic mind. Its weapons could disable entire fleets without firing a shot. And worst of all, no one knew how many more of these ships Earth had. On Zalari Prime, panic grew. In the capital city of Velar, crowds gathered outside government buildings. News reports played loops of the Liberty floating beside the massive Zalari fleet. "This changes everything," said Elder Talamin during a closed-door meeting with the High Council. Elder Ralzek scoffed. "How? We still have thousands of ships, billions of soldiers. We can crush them if we must." Talamin looked at him calmly. "And what if you're wrong?" Ralzek frowned. "You think one ship makes them gods?" "No," she said. "I think one ship shows us what they're capable of, and I don't believe for a second that this is all they have." Around the table, other elders nodded. They had seen enough to know. Humans weren't just different. They were dangerous, and they were smart. Meanwhile, aboard the Liberty, preparations were underway for the next step. We need to show them more, Hayes told his crew. Make them understand that we're not here to take over. We're here to coexist. Maggie crossed her arms. You mean scare them some more? Hayes grinned. Same thing. Jake walked in with a report. Sir, the Zalari are asking for another meeting. This time they want to see how our weapons work. Maggie groaned. Oh, great. Now they want a demo. Hayes stood up. Perfect. Let's give them one. Later that evening, the Liberty undocked from the station and moved out into open space. Behind it, a large group of Zalari officers and scientists watched from observation decks. Among them was Envoy Threxon, who stood silently beside Commander. Sorel, you really want to see what this ship can do? Sorel asked him. Threxon nodded. If we're going to decide whether they're friend or foe, yes. Sorel turned to the comms officer. Tell them we're ready. On the Liberty, Hayes received the message. All right, he said. Time to put on a show. He turned to Jake. Target drone. 2,000 kilometers ahead. Fire main weapon. Jake nodded. He tapped a few commands. From the front of the Liberty, a beam of blue light shot forward. It hit the target drone in less than a second. There was no explosion, just silence. Then the drone simply vanished, as if it had never existed. Back on the orbital eye, gasps filled the bridge. What? What was that? Varnak whispered. Sorel stared at the screen. Did they vaporize it? No, a sensor officer replied. It's gone, not destroyed, just erased. Silence. Even Ralzek had nothing to say. On board the Liberty, Hayes turned to his crew. That, he said, was a warning shot. Jake blinked. Warning shot? You made it disappear. Hayes shrugged. Better than blowing it up. Maggie rolled her eyes. You enjoy scaring people, don't you? Hayes smiled. Only when it gets results. Back on Zalari Prime, the footage of the demonstration was already being broadcast. Across the Empire, species under Zalari rule saw the same image. Drone vanishing into nothing. Some saw power, others saw fear, and a few saw opportunity. In the far reaches of the conquered, rebel factions began whispering among themselves. If one human ship could do this, what else could they do? Messages were sent. Secret codes passed between hidden bases. One phrase appeared again and again. Maybe it's time to choose a new side. Meanwhile, on the Liberty, Hayes met once more with Envoy Threxon. They sat together in the ship's briefing room. Threxon finally spoke. You showed us your power, but why? Hayes leaned back. Because knowledge is power, and fear comes from ignorance. Threxon frowned. So you wanted us to fear you? Hayes shook his head. No. I wanted you to understand that we're not weak, that we won't be pushed around, that we can stand beside you, not below you. Threxon studied him. You speak like a leader. I'm just a captain, Hayes said. But I know what my people are capable of, and I know what happens when someone tries to control them. Threxon looked away. You make it sound like war is coming. Hayes met his gaze. War doesn't come from strength, it comes from weakness, from fear, from misunderstanding. He stood up. My job is to make sure none of that happens. Threxon nodded slowly. Then may your mission succeed. As he left, Maggie walked in. Well? She asked. Hayes smiled. I think they're starting to get it, she smirked. Or they're just scared. Either way, Hayes said, we've changed the game. Outside, the stars burned cold and silent, but deep within the galaxy something had shifted. The humans had arrived, and they were not alone. The Liberty remained in Zalari space for another 2 days after the demonstration. During that time, the Zalari High Council held emergency meetings. Scientists worked non-stop to understand what they had seen, and across the Empire, whispers spread like wildfire. A single human ship had stunned an entire fleet. It had shut down a major military station with its AI. It had erased a target without leaving a trace. And worst of all, it had done it all without even trying to fight. On Zalari Prime, panic was growing. In the capital city of Veller, crowds gathered outside government buildings. News reports played the same footage over and over. The Liberty floating silently beside the massive Zalari fleet. "Who are these humans?" one reporter asked. Another said, "What else are they hiding?" And others whispered the same question, in secret corners of the city. What if they're not our enemies, but our salvation? Because not everyone in the Zalari Concord loved their rulers. Across the empire, dozens of species lived under Zalari control. Some were treated well. Others were forced into labor or kept in line by fear. Now those oppressed people saw something new. They saw hope, and they began to act. Back on board the Liberty, Captain Daniel Hayes sat in his quarters, reading reports from Earth. His XO, Maggie Carter, stood nearby. "They've seen the footage," she said. "Earth knows what we did." Hayes nodded. "How are they reacting?" Maggie sighed. "Mixed. Some governments are excited. They see this as proof that humanity can stand on its own among the stars. And the others?" She looked at him. "They're scared. They think we might have started a war." Hayes smiled faintly. "We didn't start anything. We just made ourselves known." Maggie crossed her arms. "Still, some leaders want you to come home. Now." Hayes leaned back. "Tell them I'm not done yet." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" He stood up. "I came here to open the door. I'm not going to shut it now." Just then, Jake Ross entered the room. "Captain," he said, "we picked up something strange." Hayes turned. "Define strange." Jake walked over to a small console and pulled up a screen. "We got a message," he said. "From someone. Inside the Zalari Empire. Not the government, not the military, someone else." Hayes studied the data. "Who sent it?" Jake shook his head. "No name, just a request." "For what?" "To talk." Maggie frowned. "Talk? About what?" Jake tapped a few keys. A short message appeared on the screen. "We know who you are. We know what you did. If you want allies, we are listening." Silence filled the room. Hayes read the words again, then he looked at Jake. "Can we trace the signal?" Jake nodded. "It came from a mining colony in Sector 9B, controlled by the Zalari but heavily monitored." Maggie narrowed her eyes. "So whoever sent this took a big risk." Hayes smiled. "Good. That means they're serious." He turned to Jake. "Send a reply. Tell them we'll listen, but only if they can prove they're not working for the Zalari." Jake hesitated. "Sir, this could be a trap." "I know," Hayes said, "but every great alliance starts with a little trust." Maggie groaned. "That's dangerous." Hayes grinned. "That's diplomacy." Meanwhile, on Zalari Prime, tensions were rising. Inside the Grand Council Hall, Elder Talamine stood before the assembled leaders. "This cannot be ignored," she said. "The humans have changed everything." Elder Ralzek scoffed. "All they've done is scare us. That's not change. That's manipulation." Talamine shook her head. "No, this is bigger than fear. The people are watching. The other species are watching, and some of them are choosing sides." Ralzek narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Talamine pressed a button on the table. A screen lit up behind her. Footage played. Messages intercepted from rebel groups. Secret transmissions between hidden bases. "They're reaching out to the humans," she said, "asking for help." Ralzek slammed his fist on the table. "Then we destroy the Liberty. End this now." "No," Talamine said firmly. "That would make us look weak. Desperate." Ralzek stepped forward. "We are the Zalari Concord. We rule this galaxy. We will not be threatened by one ship." Talamine met his gaze. "Then stop acting like you are." Silence fell. Finally, another elder spoke. "What should we do?" Talamine looked toward the stars outside the window. "We learn more," she said, "before we decide who they really are." Back on board the Liberty, the reply came within hours. The sender had accepted the challenge. They would meet. 3 days later, the Liberty arrived at the mining colony in Sector 9B. It was a rough place, cold, dark, full of workers who looked tired and broken. Hayes, Maggie, and a small team landed near a storage facility. Waiting for them was a group of 4 figures. 2 were Zalari, but not in uniform. The other 2 were different species entirely. One was tall and thin, with dark skin and glowing eyes. The other was short and stocky, with thick armor-like skin. Hayes stepped forward. "You called," he said simply. The tallest Zalari nodded. "We did." Hayes tilted his head. "Why?" The figure looked around nervously. Then he spoke. "We don't serve the Zalari conquered, we fight against it." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Rebels?" The second Zalari stepped forward. "Not yet, but we could be." Hayes studied them. "What do you want from me?" The alien with glowing eyes answered. "We want freedom." The armored one added, "And we think you can help us get it." Hayes looked at Maggie. She gave a small nod. He turned back to the group. "I didn't come here to start a war," he said, "or to pick sides." The rebels looked disappointed. "But," Hayes continued, "I did come here to understand." The glowing-eyed alien frowned. "Understand what?" Hayes looked each of them in the eye. "I want to understand why you think humans are your best chance." The leader of the group stepped forward. He was older than the rest. His voice was calm. "Because you showed strength without cruelty," he said. "You proved that power doesn't always mean destruction. And you made the Zalari afraid." Hayes smiled slightly. "They should be." The alien nodded. "So what do you say? Will you help us?" Hayes thought for a moment. Then he looked at them and said, "No." The group stiffened. Hayes raised a hand. "Not yet. Not until I know who you really are." "What you're really fighting for?" The leader stared at him. Hayes stepped closer. "If you want my help, you'll have to earn it." The alien nodded slowly. "Then we will." Hayes turned and walked away. As he reached the shuttle, Maggie followed. "You really think they'll come through?" she asked. Hayes looked back once. "I don't know," he said. "But now they have something to fight for." Outside, the stars burned cold and silent. But deep within the galaxy, something had changed. The humans had arrived, and now others were starting to follow. The Liberty had barely left the mining colony behind when the first signs of trouble appeared. Back on Zalari Prime, the High Council was in chaos. Rebel messages were spreading faster than the government could suppress them. Across the Empire, whispers of revolution grew louder, and someone decided it was time to act on board the Orbital Eye. Commander Sorrell sat at his post watching as reports came in from across the sector. "Sir," said Lieutenant Varnak nervously, "we've detected unusual activity near the border." Sorrell turned. "Define unusual." Varnak swallowed. "Multiple ships moving fast. No known ID. They're not ours." Sorrell frowned. "Then who are they?" Before Varnak could answer, a new voice spoke from behind them. "They're not rebels," said Admiral Korak, stepping onto the bridge. "They're fanatics." Sorrell stood up straighter. "Explain." Korak's expression was grim. "A rogue faction within our military has broken away. They believe Earth is a threat that must be eliminated before it spreads further." Sorrell's eyes narrowed. "You mean they want to attack the Liberty?" Korak nodded. "Yes, and they won't ask for permission." Sorrell turned back to the screen. He watched as the unknown fleet moved toward the human warship's last known location. "No," he muttered. "This can't happen." But it already was. Across space, Captain Daniel Hayes sat in the command chair aboard the Liberty, studying sensor data with Tactical Officer Jake Ross. "Something's off," Jake said, frowning at his console. "We're picking up multiple ships approaching fast. No identification codes." Hayes leaned forward. "Zalari?" Jake shook his head. "Not on official channels, but their tech looks similar." Maggie Carter walked in holding a report. "I just got word from our contact on the mining colony. There's a group inside the Zalari military that doesn't like what we're doing." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" They think we're destabilizing the Empire, Maggie said, and they want us gone. Hayes sighed. So someone's trying to start a war without telling their own government. Jake looked up. That's illegal, right? Maggie smirked. Probably, but politics don't stop crazy people. Hayes stood slowly. Then we need to make sure this doesn't turn into something bigger. He turned to Ellie Morgan at comms. Open a channel to the orbital eye, now. Ellie worked quickly. A moment later, Sorrel's face appeared on the screen. You're being targeted, Hayes said without greeting, by one of your own fleets. Sorrel's jaw tightened. We know. We tried to stop them. But they cut communications and jumped. Out early. Hayes crossed his arms. How many ships? Sorrel checked his console. 8. 2 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and 3 frigates. Hayes did the math. Not a huge force, but enough to cause real damage if they struck first. He turned to Jake. Prepare defensive systems. I don't want to fire unless I have to. Jake hesitated. Sir, if they hit us first, I know, Hayes said calmly, but we don't get to decide how this ends. We only get to decide how we respond. Jake nodded slowly. Understood. Back. On the orbital eye, Sorrel turned to Korak. We need to recall those ships, he said. Korak shook his head. They won't listen. They made their choice. Sorrel clenched his fists. Then we warn the humans. He turned back to the screen. Captain Hayes, you may be under attack soon. Be ready. Hayes gave him a small smile. Already am. The E. Channel closed. Outside, the stars remained silent, but deep within the void, danger was closing in. The rogue fleet arrived less than 20 minutes later. They came fast and hard, weapons hot and shields raised. From the Liberty's bridge, alarms blared. They're locking weapons, Jake shouted. Hayes didn't move. Shields up, no return fire. Jake stared at him. Sir? That's an order, Ross. Jake gritted his teeth but obeyed. Outside, the enemy fleet opened fire. Beams of red and blue light shot through space. They struck the Liberty's hull. The ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Shields at 85%, Maggie reported. No critical damage. Hayes stayed calm. Still no return fire. Jake looked ready to argue, but Maggie stopped him with a look. Hayes turned to Ellie. Try to hail them. She tried. No response. Just more fire. After 10 seconds, Hayes finally spoke again. All right. Enough. He stepped forward. Ross, activate point defense grid. Target all enemy ships. Disable, not destroy. Jake grinned. Now you're speaking my language. He tapped a few keys. Instantly, the Liberty responded. Dozens of small turrets unfolded from hidden panels along the hull. They fired in perfect coordination. Blue pulses of energy shot out, each one locked onto a different target. One by one, the enemy ships began to flicker. Engines failed. Weapons went offline. Shields dropped. Within 2 minutes, the entire attacking fleet was drifting helplessly in space. Silence fell over the Liberty's bridge. Targets disabled, Jake reported. No fatalities, Hayes nodded. Good. Maggie let out a breath. That was close. Hayes turned to her. It was a test. A test? She asked. He looked out the view screen. Someone wanted to see what we'd do if attacked, if we'd fight back, or try to kill them all. Maggie frowned. And now? Hayes smiled slightly. Now No, we're not monsters. Back on the orbital eye, Sorrel watched the footage in stunned silence. His officers stood frozen. One of them whispered, That wasn't even a battle. It was a demonstration. Sorrel nodded slowly. And we just lost. Back on Zalari Prime, the news spread like wildfire. Rebel groups watched the footage in awe. This proves it, said one leader. They don't fight for power. They fight to protect. Others agreed. They showed mercy, another said. Even after being attacked. Across the Empire, hope grew. Meanwhile, the High Council met in secret. This changes everything, said Elder Talamine. Ralzek looked furious. They destroyed half our fleet. No, Talamine corrected. They defeated 8 rogue ships without killing anyone. Ralzek growled. They humiliated us. Talamine looked at him. No, they offered peace. Again, silence followed. Finally, another elder spoke. What do we do now? Talamine stood tall. We learn, before we decide who they really are. Back on board the Liberty, Hayes gathered his crew. Well, he said, looks like we passed another test. Maggie smirked. You make it sound like school. He grinned. In a way, it is, just with bigger consequences. Jake leaned back in his seat. So what now? Do we go home? Hayes looked out at the UA stars. No, he said. We keep going. Maggie raised an eyebrow. To where? Hayes turned to her. To wherever the next challenge is. Outside, the galaxy watched, waiting, wondering. Who were these humans? And what else were they hiding? For now only the stars knew, but the answer was coming. The stars were quiet again, but the galaxy was not. News of the Liberty's victory over the rogue Zolari fleet had spread faster than light itself. Across the Empire, rebel groups celebrated. Governments watched with cautious eyes. And for the first time in centuries, the Zolari Concord faced something they hadn't expected. A new power, not one built on conquest or fear, but on strength, control, and restraint. On Earth, the world was watching too. In Washington, D.C., President Linda Moore stood before a global audience from the White House lawn. We have made contact, she said, her voice calm but firm, and we have shown that humanity can stand among the stars, not as subjects, not as enemies, but as equals. Behind her, flags from every nation waved in the wind. Across the planet, people cheered. Some cried. Others simply stared at their screens in awe. Humanity was no longer alone, and it would never be weak again. Back in Zolari space, the Liberty remained under observation. Commander Sorel stood on the bridge of the orbital eye, staring at the human warship through the main view screen. It floated there like a ghost, silent, powerful, unshaken. Beside him, Envoy Threxen spoke softly. They've changed everything, he said. Sorel didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, I used to believe strength meant size, numbers, firepower. Threxen tilted his head. And now, Sorel looked at the screen again. Now I see that real strength isn't about how many ships you have, he said. It's about knowing when to use them, and when not to. Threxen nodded slowly. That is wisdom. Sorel turned to him. Do you think they'll try to take over? Threxen shook his head. No, they don't want our empire. They want to be seen. Sorel frowned. Seen? Threxen looked out into space. As something more than just another species. As something worth understanding. Sorel thought about that. Then he turned back to his officers. Send a message to High Council, he ordered. Request immediate diplomatic talks with Earth. Varnak blinked. Sir? You heard me, Sorel said firmly. We need to learn more about these humans before someone else does. On board the Liberty, Captain Daniel Hayes sat in the command chair reading the latest reports. Maggie Carter walked in holding a data pad. They're calling for peace talks, she said. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Already? She smirked. You scared them good. He smiled faintly. Good. Fear gets attention. Respect keeps it. Jake Ross leaned back in his seat. So what now, do we go home? Hayes looked out the view screen. No, he said. Not yet. Maggie crossed her arms. Why not? Hayes stood up slowly. Because this is just the beginning. He turned to face his crew. We opened the door, he said. But we haven't stepped through it yet. Jake grinned. So what do we do next? Hayes looked around the room. We keep moving, he said. Keep learning. Keep showing who we are. Maggie gave a small smile. Until the galaxy knows we're here to stay. Hayes nodded. Exactly. Back on Zalari Prime, the Grand Council met once more. Elder Talamine stood before the others. This changes everything, she said. The humans are not just a threat. They are a force. Elder Ralzek narrowed his eyes. You sound almost impressed. Talamine looked at him calmly. Shouldn't we be? Ralzek scoffed. They showed off, that's all. Talamine shook her head. No. They showed restraint. Mercy. Power without cruelty. She looked around the room. They could have destroyed us, she said. But they chose not to. Silence followed. Another elder finally spoke. What should we do? Talamine took a breath. We offer them a place, she said. At the table. Ralzek looked shocked. You mean give them a seat in the Concord? Talamine nodded. Yes, not as rulers, not as subjects, but as partners. Some elders whispered among themselves. Others looked uncertain. But Talamine kept speaking. The galaxy is changing, she said, and if we want to survive it, we must change with it. Outside the council hall, the stars burned cold and silent. But deep within the hearts of those who watched, something new had begun. Hope. Meanwhile, on board the Liberty, the ship prepared for departure. Jake stood at his post, running final checks. All systems green, he said. Ready for jump. Ellie Morgan looked up from comms. Message. Incoming from Earth, it's President Moore. Hayes nodded. Put it on screen. The president's face appeared. Captain Hayes, she said. Well done. Hayes gave a small salute. Thank you, Madam President. Moore smiled slightly. You've done more than open a door. You've kicked it down. Hayes chuckled. Only because it was locked. Moore's expression grew serious. What's next? Hayes looked toward the stars. We keep going, he said. There's still more to learn. Moore nodded. Stay safe, and remember, Earth is behind you. The channel closed. Hayes turned to his crew. All right, he said. Let's go find the next chapter. Jake grinned. FTL drive ready. Maggie stood beside Hayes. Where to? She asked. Hayes looked out at the endless black. To where the real story begins. The Liberty fired its engines. Stars stretched into lines, and then in a flash of blue light, the human warship vanished into the unknown. Across the galaxy, the name Earth was spoken for the first time in centuries. Not as a myth, not as a joke, but as a power, and as the stars watched in silence, one truth became clear. Humanity had arrived, and it wasn't leaving.